Today, we will continue to learn about conjunctions, going into what are called subordinating conjunctions. Just like with regular conjunctions, you probably already use subordinating conjunctions in your everyday speech. You just didn't know that's what you were using. After this lesson, you'll know what a subordinating conjunction is, how it's used, and you'll even use them in sentences that you create yourselves. Last class, we learned about conjunctions and their role in compound sentences. A conjunction, put simply, is a word that joins groups of words, like phrases and clauses. This clip from the video we watched from Schoolhouse Rock illustrated conjunctions being like connecting cars on a train. If you want to watch the video again, just click on the clip and it will take you to the video. Conjunctions are a key ingredient in making compound sentences, with the recipe being an independent clause plus a conjunction plus another independent clause. Compound is just another way of saying combine. So a compound sentence is a sentence of two independent clauses combined, and the conjunction is the glue or the connecting car if we're thinking of two parts of a train like the video showed us. Remember that independent clauses can stand on their own as a sentence. It provides a complete thought. Think about how you learned in Texas history that Texas was once an independent nation, the Republic of Texas. It functioned independently from any other nation. It stood on its own in the world as one country. It had a complete government all by itself. Let's take, for example, the clause, I have a sugar addiction. That works just fine on its own. So does the clause, I eat pie all the time. Neither of these clauses needs anything extra to help us understand them. The thoughts are complete enough to be sentences. However, if we wanted to, we could combine or compound these two independent clauses into one sentence so that they are related. I have a sugar addiction, so I eat pie all the time. So is our conjunction because it brings these independent clauses together in a sensible way. We now see that my sugar addiction causes me to eat pie all the time because our conjunction connects these two ideas. Who remembers what fanboys stands for? That's right. It's our helpful mnemonic device for common conjunctions. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. We use these all the time, don't we? But remember, these are not the only conjunctions available. A conjunction is any word that serves the role of conjoining clauses together. Say I want to go from Dallas to Houston. I could drive, fly, take a bus, or even walk. You are always using transportation, though. When you combine clauses, you always use a conjunction. Fanboys, like driving, is just one way of doing this. Take this example. David ate 20 cupcakes, even though he is allergic to cupcakes. Even though is our conjunction here, yet it's not part of fanboys, but it's still bringing these two clauses together, so it is a different kind of conjunction. We call fanboys coordinating conjunctions because they bring together two equal independent clauses. But what if the clauses aren't equal? What if one of them depends on the other to make sense? This is where dependent or subordinate clauses come in. When we talk about complex sentences, as opposed to compound sentences, it sometimes helps to refer to independent clauses as main clauses and dependent clauses as subordinate clauses. So we'll start getting used to these terms. When we think of a subordinate, we think of something that has less power than something else. And it makes sense here because subordinate clauses have less power than main clauses. A dependent or subordinate clause gives more information to an independent or main clause. A dependent clause can also not stand on its own. It depends on the independent clause for its meaning to be understood, and it is subordinate because it does not have the power to be its own complete thought. Let's look at this example. My mother carries her purse with her wherever she goes. The red underlined section is the dependent or subordinate clause. Wherever she goes doesn't work as a sentence. We need more information to know what it's talking about. In this clause, the word wherever works as a subordinating conjunction, which is different than a coordinating conjunction. Since we are working with a different kind of clause now, we get a different kind of sentence, called a complex sentence. It's no longer two independent clauses with a coordinating conjunction in between. We now have an independent clause, a subordinating conjunction, and a dependent clause. Sounds complex, doesn't it? Well, don't worry. I'll help us understand this better. A subordinating conjunction is unique because it combines a main clause and a subordinate clause. It also helps us distinguish which clause is main and which clause is subordinate. Let's look at that sentence we had before about my mother and her purse. Our conjunction here needs to be able to make sense of the main clause and subordinate clause being together. Using a coordinating conjunction from fanboys here wouldn't work, because we know that these two clauses aren't equal. Think about if we were to say, my mother carries her purse with her, but she goes. That doesn't sound quite right, does it? We can tell that our main clause is the first one, and our subordinate clause is the second one, and the word but would make us think that they should be equal in this sentence. That's why we need the subordinating conjunction wherever, so we know that my mother doesn't just carry her purse, which is our main idea, she does it wherever she goes. Let's look at some examples and see if we can identify the different parts of these complex sentences. I would prefer to walk to school rather than sit in traffic. The only part of this sentence that can stand on its own is the first part, I would prefer to walk to school. Now we can see that sit in traffic is subordinate because it depends on the main clause. From this, we know that rather than is our subordinating conjunction, bringing everything together. Let's look at the next one. A true daredevil doesn't care whether he lives or dies. The same methods can be applied here. A true daredevil doesn't care. This works by itself, even though we may have some questions about what they don't care about. It's complete enough to be independent. Then, we elaborate on it with, he lives or dies. Now we see what this daredevil doesn't care about. Finally, our subordinating conjunction ties it all in so we can see that these two clauses are connected. This last example is a little tricky, but it has the exact same pieces as the previous ones. Since that fateful day, Ronnie was never the same. The first part of the phrase, since that fateful day, doesn't mean anything to us on its own, so that isn't the main clause. The main clause doesn't show up until the end of the sentence, Ronnie was never the same. The subordinate clause is this first one, that fateful day. And our subordinating conjunction is actually the first word of the sentence. The way it ties the sentence together is different, but the sentence has all the pieces, a main clause, a subordinate clause, and a subordinating conjunction. So it actually still works. That's the neat part about complex sentences. The subordinate clause can come before the main clause, and we still understand it because the subordinating conjunction identifies the subordinate clause. Now, let's take a couple minutes on your own and see if you can pick out the three parts of these example sentences. Let's go over these sentences. In our first sentence, Michael was an excellent swimmer is our independent and main clause. Then we see, whereas Jacob was not, with whereas being our conjunction and Jacob was not being our subordinate clause. In the next sentence, we see the order switched around again. After World War II, this is subordinate because it doesn't work by itself. The word after tells us about how the subordinate clause fits with the main clause. The nation of Japan became more westernized. So that is our conjunction. Lastly, Joanna did all of her homework early simply because she enjoyed it. Here we have our main clause first, followed by the subordinate clause. But we don't fully connect that Joanna doing her homework early and her enjoying it are related without saying simply because. So let's review what we've gone over so far before we get into your assignment. Conjunctions are words that combine clauses together. If you combine two independent clauses, you use a coordinating conjunction, and we remember those with the acronym FANBOYS. If you combine an independent clause and a dependent clause, you use a subordinating conjunction. Remember that we call independent clauses main clauses and dependent clauses subordinate clauses because it helps explain how they are used in these types of sentences. Subordinate clauses and main clauses need to be combined using subordinating conjunctions, which help us to know which clause is which, since the subordinating conjunction always comes before the subordinate clause. And it helps us understand how the main and subordinate clauses are connected, what kind of a relationship they have. Here's your assignment for today. Using the partners we had in our last class, I want you to make 5 examples of complex sentences like the ones we went over today. They will each have a main clause, a subordinating conjunction, and a subordinate clause. You can click on the link on subordinating conjunction to see a list of different words that work as subordinating conjunctions. Then, I want you to label each part of the sentence as a main clause, a subordinating conjunction, or a subordinate clause, and use different colors for each one, like in my example. Also, for extra credit, you can make at least one of these complex sentences have the main clause come after the subordinate clause. Feel free to look back over our examples for some guidance, and I'll check in with everyone to see how you're coming along.